bitch. Where's my money? If you want to help me out, you can subscribe to me on Patreon, which is Grimachu, on Subscribestar, which is Grim-Jim, or if you want to make a one-off donation to help support me and keep the channel going, you can do so at paypal.me/JDesborough. Thanks. Hello, lovelies. You already live under socialism. You might not call it socialism, it might not be the Marxist definition of socialism, but you do already live under it to one degree or another. Some people, pathologically allergic to the S word, might call it welfare capitalism. I reckon mixed economy is probably a better term, but that's where a country acknowledges that at least some things should be held in the commons for everybody, and that some regulation might be necessary here and there to tweak the incentive structure to actually serve people rather than shareholders or profit, that recognises that things like natural monopolies exist where competition is essentially meaningless or doesn't apply, or at least largely meaningless, and where the profit motive doesn't help or even apply. Socialist policies may even be necessary for a country to even be considered civilised in the modern age. At a bare minimum, you're probably looking at things like socialised education, socialised military, socialised policing. Depending on the country, you might also be looking at socialised healthcare, retirement support, unemployment support, prisons, power, water, railways, gas, telephony, libraries, higher education, and more. And generally speaking, as a broad sort of generalisation, those countries that socialise more of their societies tend to be happier, to be more socially and economically mobile, more generally prosperous, and to have narrowed gaps between rich and poor, which is an important indicator of societal stability. Yet, despite the evidence from dozens of countries, others are very stubborn in their resistance of socialisation of anything, even natural monopolies, and seem to be just dead set against holding anything in the commons for the common good, for the good of everybody, despite the obvious empirical evidence that this is a much better way to go about things. Dismissing the racially homogenous argument that often comes up when you talk about Scandinavia, because it's obviously absurd racist filth, and dismissing the size of the population thing because economy of scale is a positive factor in favour of socialisation, what we're left with is an ideological wedding to the idea of competition and capitalism, almost as religion. It's either that or people are wedded to profiteering and corruption, seeking to sell off or keep private public assets for the wealth of a very few who are capable of buying democracy, or at least the media, which kind of amounts to the same thing in a lot of ways. Competition can be great in certain circumstances, but the profit motive, also useful in some instances, is the wrong motivational structure in other instances. Now, normally here I talk about the most obvious example, the hardy perennial of examples, which is healthcare. But let's talk about two more recent examples here in the UK: water and power. The UK privatised both of these in my lifetime, but there is no meaningful competition, especially not for water, where you're very much geographically tied in to who supplies your water. And as a result, the water companies are not really motivated or incentivized to improve water infrastructure to deal with leaks, to please customers, but rather to create profits and to please shareholders. So charging as much as possible while doing the least amount possible, and without any real competition, due to the nature of the business, there's no reason for them to act any differently. So as a result, we have a leaky network of pipes. Just locally, it took decades to deal with some sewerage issues, and just recently we're having massive sewer discharges into rivers and seas. Previously, under European regulation, those rivers and seas had become a lot cleaner than they once were, but deregulation in part, and lack of investment and so on, the incentive structure, it doesn't serve the public, it serves the shareholders at best. Meanwhile, in the power sector, a lack of a public option or meaningful regulation of the power sector has meant a similar profit motive has given us electricity price increases multiple times those on mainland Europe, with its more socialised and regulated sector, while energy companies post record profits, and the vulnerable face a winter of freezing cold, choosing between heating and eating, and even the prospect of heat banks, like food banks, but where someone can afford to have their heat on. That's all down to the profit motive and the lack of socialisation of these industries, which are natural monopolies. Socialised incentive structures, if set up properly of course, democratised and consumer focused, aren't necessarily the best option for everything, mobile phone making or something, but they do seem to provide better services at a lower cost and to better serve the interests of the end user, especially when it comes to infrastructure and health. The NHS, for example, despite all of its artificially created problems over years of cuts and undermining and more recently immigration changes, it still manages to deliver a service that's about twice as good as the US healthcare system at about half the cost. And it's not even the best healthcare system, not even the best socialised healthcare system in the world anymore. Stick that in your fiscal conservative pipe and smoke it. If you are a fiscal conservative, you should be all over socialised healthcare. The other mental block when it comes to socialisation seems to be the idea that people who don't deserve help or need help get it anyway, ignoring the efficiencies of universalising things. That's a Victorian attitude about the worthy poor. It also misses the enlightened self-interest angle of socialisation. Socialised health brings down private healthcare costs. When people's basic needs are met, there is less criminality, less mental illness, less illness in general, which brings costs and societal issues down for everybody. A socialised, progressive, reformist prison system, such as that found in Norway, means less people in prison, costing you money, and more people turned around to contribute to society rather than to take from it. This is the frustrating thing as a sane old school leftist, even for social democrats or democratic socialists, advocates of mixed economies, whatever you want to call it. We already know, and I mean we as in humanity, we already know what works. The world has granted us many natural experiments in socialisation, and we can see the positive effects. But there are still these ideological and emotional roadblocks to implementing effective solutions in other countries. Largely ignorance, I think. I mean, call it welfare capitalism if you're that allergic to the S word. But let's at least make decisions based upon the facts and what turns out to be your own enlightened self-interest. You already live under socialism to one degree or another if you're in a developed nation. You might not call it that, you might object, but those are the facts. There's socialist policies even in capitalist overarching economies. And they work really well when properly funded and when not undermined. And we know what works from many countries. So let's do that. And just stop knee-jerking at the name. Zang. On a crazy whim, I recorded the almost entire 5th edition D&D SRD as an audiobook, and you can pick that up, pay what you want on DriveThruRPG, or you can listen to it on a playlist on my YouTube channel, Postmortem Video.